Miguel, ¿me puedes confirmar que me estás oyendo, por favor?
Yep, we can hear you.
Gracias.
Miguel, good morning. Can you hear me? This is Eddie.
We can hear you, Eddie, loud and clear.
Okay, is there some sort of an outline of how the meeting's gonna go? Or what we're gonna do?
No, I will explain, but more or less what we want to do at this meeting is only one agenda item. So when we open, we will have a roll call. Ask anybody if they want to have other business after she finishes. But Dr.
Okay.
Duval is going to run the meeting. She's going to have a presentation and she's going to explain everybody what this is all about.
Okay.
And then, you know, people that want to ask questions have to go through you. And we have the chat here. I can tell you in the chat, you know, so-and-so is on the turn to speak, and then you let them talk.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Hola, Miguel, it's Michelle. I just want to make sure that you can hear me okay.
Good morning. Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. This is Toby.
Morning, Toby.
How are you doing?
Fine, fine. We're gonna wait 5 minutes to start to allow maybe somebody who wants to hook up. I believe that Tom Daly was going to go to Howard's office, and he'll be with Carlos Fachete there. So in 5 minutes, we start.
Thank you.
Okay, it's 10:05, and this is the St. Croix District Advisory Panel meeting. The agenda for today will be to consider the 5-year strategic plan being prepared by Dr. Duvar. The chair of this meeting is Edward Schuster. Please, Eddie. And when you open the meeting, just state the date, the time, and I will do the roll call, and then we allow Dr. Duvar to lead us through the presentation.
Good morning. It's 10:05, March 30th, 2021. Officially open this meeting now for the DAP St. Croix meeting. Just a brief housekeeping. Mute your mics when you're not talking. so everybody could hear clearly with the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Eddie. Okay, presents are William Tobias, Michael Funk, Marsha Taylor, Madeline Gujan, Liahai Rivera, Graciela Garcia Molina, Cristina Olan, Carlos Fachete, Michelle Duval, Diana Martino, and myself, Miguel Rolón. There's a person identified as an iPad guest. Can you identify yourself for the record? Whomever is using the iPad for the meeting?
That's me, Miguel. I think I'm the only one. If I look into the participants, iPad,
Excellent.
that's me, yeah.
Okay. Carlos, do you have Tom at the office yet?
No, he's about 2 minutes from here.
Okay.
And also Mike Fuller.
Mike Fuller will be
But
with
he
you.
will be logging on by phone.
Okay.
But he's in another meeting right now, and he'll log on as soon as he's finished his meeting.
Okay. So I guess we can start. Hello? Okay, we can start and then allow Dr. Duval to share her screen. I made her co-host, so Dr. Duval, you can start the meeting.
Thank you, Miguel, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I will start sharing my screen here. Okay, can you see that? Okay,
Yes.
great. I will put this into presentation mode. Okay, so I just want to thank everyone for being here today. As Miguel indicated, this presentation will take us through the draft strategic plan framework today. Our goal here is for you all to review the draft island-specific objectives for the different theme areas of the strategic plan. And so just to give a quick overview of what we're going to be walking through today, first, I'm going to give just a brief review of the components of a strategic plan. Then I'm going to talk about the sources of information that went into developing these draft components. I'll give a little schematic of just the general plan, organization, and structure, and then we'll get into our major purpose here today, which is to review these draft objectives and provide any comment and feedback on those draft objectives. I do want to just let folks know that to help in your review of the draft objectives, I've also included some potential strategies, which we'll review what a strategy is, but we do plan to have a follow-up meeting sometime in June that is specifically focused on the strategies that would be used to meet the different draft objectives. So just to remind everybody what the components of a strategic plan are, you see them up here on the screen, and it starts with the vision, which is really the desired future state that an organization would like to achieve. So this is meant to be very big picture and aspirational, and the council had a vision statement brainstorming session back in August of 2019. So that's important to the development of the draft vision statements that I'll be showing you. Next is the mission. And so the mission is really the fundamental purpose or focus of an organization. It's like why the organization exists. And it also outlines or expresses an organization's approach to achieve its vision. Goals are very broad outcomes that help an organization achieve that vision. You can think of them as large stepping stones to achieve a vision. They're not meant to be measurable, but to just reflect the impact of an organization's work. Then we come to the objectives, and these are the things that we're going to be reviewing here today. So this is the focus of our meeting today, and objectives are meant to be specific, often measurable targets that help an organization to get to those goals. And you can think of them as mini steps or a subset of the goals. And then finally, strategies, which is something we haven't really talked about before, is the how. It's how an organization will meet an objective. So you can use several different strategies to try to meet an objective, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And so just to provide an example of what these different components of a strategic plan look like, this was a slide that I showed back about a year and a half ago, and I thought it would be a good illustration of these different components this time as well. So what you see here on the screen is a problem statement that I'm grumpy, I'm tired, and my pants don't fit. So, my vision is that I look and feel fabulous. And so my goal to help achieve that vision is to get healthy. So I have established 3 specific observable objectives under that goal, and they are to exercise more, eat better, and lower my stress. And so in order to meet my objective of exercising more, I'm going to use 3 different strategies. So this is how I'm going to meet my objective of exercising more. And that would be to jog 3 times a week, do yoga a couple times a week, and take the stairs. Similarly, for my objective of eating better, how I'm going to meet that objective is to make dinner at home 5 times a week instead of going out to eat. I'm going to reduce my consumption of red meat, and I'm going to increase the amount of vegetables that I'm eating. And then finally, our third objective here of lowering my stress. Again, my strategies to meet that objective are to do yoga a couple times a week and spend more time with my dog. So if we translate these components into the context of the council, the vision is really, what does the council want U.S. Caribbean fisheries to look like in the future? The mission is really the council's mandate for management under the Magnuson-Stevens Act. And the goals are the big picture focus areas that really describe the ultimate impact of the council's work. And these are what are necessary to achieve the vision. And again, the objectives, as I mentioned earlier, are meant to be specific and observable. They describe the intended results and can really be directly linked to, an issue or a problem or several issues, as the case may be. And then again, strategies are really the how. This is the approaches that the council will take to meet its objectives. And so next, I just wanted to cover the sources of information that were used to develop. I'm going to show you a draft vision statements, the draft goal area statements, as well as the draft island-specific objectives for St. Croix. And there are several sources of information that went into developing these. The first is the council vision statement brainstorming session that I mentioned earlier. So this occurred back in August of 2019. Council members threw out several different ideas about what they would like to see U.S. Caribbean fisheries look like in the future. And my charge was to take that feedback and go back and develop 3 to 5 different vision statement alternatives for their consideration. The next piece of information is the stakeholder input report, and I presented some of the results of that at the council's December meeting. So, this was, recall, you all provided feedback and selected your sort of top 5 priority issues within 4 different theme areas, which I'm going to show next. So again, the stakeholder input report incorporates the district advisory panel input, as well as input from the outreach and education advisory panel on communication and outreach issues, and then also council feedback on prioritization of issues. That report also included management partner outreach from the territorial management partners, as well as NOAA Fisheries. And then we also had a public comment form that was open for a while, through which we received some additional suggestions. And then finally, the island-based fishery management plans and the previous public input received through those were also instrumental in developing some of the draft goal area statements and objectives that you will see. So this is just a reminder of what the different stakeholder and public input discussion themes were that we reviewed late last summer and early in the fall. They were management and operational issues, resource health, social, cultural, and economic issues, and communication and outreach. And so I just wanted to provide some general observations before we review the draft goal area statements and the draft island specific objectives. And so, within each of those 4 themes, there was a significant amount of overlap in the priority issues that were identified by the DAPs and the council. And so this has really resulted in some similar island specific objectives across, each of the 3 different island groups. And I think, if you recall, during the development of the island-based fishery management plans, each of you all developed goals and objectives that were specific to either Puerto Rico, St. Thomas, St. John, or St. Croix, yet there was still quite a bit of overlap in those goals and those objectives. And in several cases, you all actually had identical goals or identical objectives for some parts of the island-based fishery management plans. So it's a similar situation here. The next point I wanted to make is that many of the priority issues that we talked about late last summer could be more appropriately addressed as island-specific strategies or activities that might be part of an implementation plan. And the final point I wanted to make is that ultimately all Caribbean island districts are working towards the same broad goals. And so that's why the draft strategic plan is going to be structured something like this. So we have, one vision and one mission for all of the US Caribbean. And then we have our 4 different goal statement themes of management, ecosystem and resource health, social, cultural, and economic issues, and communication and outreach. And for each of these themes, with the exception of communication and outreach, we have a series of island-specific objectives for each of the 3 different districts, and a set of strategies that are associated with each of those objectives. So for example, for say the management goal theme, there will be a series of Puerto Rico island-specific objectives and Puerto Rico specific strategies associated with each objective. Similarly for St. Thomas and St. John, as well as for St. Croix. And so that's what you'll be seeing today is the island specific objectives for the management theme, ecosystem and resource health, social, cultural, and economic issues. Communication and outreach is a little bit different. Those draft objectives would apply to the entire CFMC jurisdiction, and they're not island specific. If you recall, we had a lot of discussion about the importance of communication and outreach throughout the US Caribbean, so throughout the council's jurisdiction, and that there wasn't really a need to prioritize those issues because all of them were extremely important. So the Outreach and Education Advisory Panel, as well as the DAPs and the council, offered a number of additional suggestions for the council to consider in its communication and outreach objectives as part of this plan. And so the current steps, so what we're doing right now is yesterday and today, we're soliciting review and feedback from the district advisory panels on the draft island specific objectives for each theme. And just as a reminder, we want to make sure these objectives are specific, but they should also be broad enough to include similar strategies and issues. I mentioned earlier that I had developed some potential strategies just to help you all think about the draft objectives and understand where they came from. And those potential strategies are based on the stakeholder input report and are really intended for illustration. And so these are contained in extra slides that I'll show after I go through the complete presentation and we circle back to get your feedback. So again, our focus really here is on the draft objectives and making sure that those objectives reflect the priorities of the St. Croix District Advisory Panel. And again, we'll be scheduling another meeting in early June to really thoroughly go through draft strategies and add to those and modify those at a later time. I also mentioned that I'm going to be showing you the draft vision, mission, and goal statement alternatives. And those are provided here for informational purposes, just so you have a sense of the big picture. But the council is actually going to be reviewing these at its April 27th, 28th meeting and selecting one of those alternatives for vision, mission in each of the 4 goal themes. I will just say that, it's our intent that once we have a draft plan put together, so we have a draft vision, draft mission statement, and the draft goal statements, and you all have identified your draft objectives, and we had the opportunity to review and develop those strategies, that the entire draft plan will also be noticed for public comments. Will be put out for public comments. So everything is drafted until it is final, if that makes sense. Okay, so now I'm just gonna quickly walk through the different vision and mission statement alternatives. We're going to start with the vision. So again, these 4 alternatives were developed based on the feedback from the council's visioning session. And so some of the themes that came through that visioning session that we did back in August of 2019 were, having healthy coral reef ecosystems, making sure that our island fishing communities were resilient and thriving, that the council was focused on supporting sustainable and resilient fisheries, providing cultural, social, and economic benefits. So these 4 different vision statement alternatives are meant to capture those different concepts and to reflect that. So I'm just leaving them up here for you to read for a moment. I'm not going to go through all of them, but again, the council will be seeing these at their August meeting, or excuse me, their April meeting, and selecting an alternative from there. The next is the mission statement alternative. So again, the mission is what's the purpose of the council? Why does it exist? And so this first sentence that you see in white in these 2 alternatives is that purpose. The Caribbean Fishery Management Council conserves, restores, and manages fishery resources in the U.S. Caribbean consistent with the requirements of the Magnuson-Stevens Act. And that sentence might sound a little familiar to you, and it's really based on the tagline that's on the council's website, which is conserving, restoring, and managing fishery resources in the U.S. Caribbean. Where each of these alternative changes is in the sentence that's in blue here. So, again, the mission statement is not just the reason why the council exists, but it's also the council's approach to achieving its mission. And so these sentences here in blue reflect the concepts of stewardship of marine resources and fisheries and island ecosystems, and the way the council goes about doing that, which is through education and stakeholder input and outreach. And this is the 3rd alternative that up here at the top of the screen, which again, just a slightly different way of trying to capture those concepts of stewardship and of fisheries and ecosystems and stakeholder outreach and collaboration. I did just want to provide, make sure everybody was on the same page about the definition of the words conserve, restore, and manage, particularly conserve. Sometimes conserve can be misinterpreted as preserve, which, when you're preserving something, you're holding it in its current state. Conserve or conservation is really about avoiding wasteful or destructive use of, in this case, a resource. And then restore is about bringing something back into existence or use, or sort of putting it back to a former state. Whereas manage, in this context is about, treating these resources with care and, exercising supervisory direction and stewardship. So now we're going to get into the 4 different goal themes. And the first one of these is management. So you see the first 3 management alternatives here on the screen in front of you. And so I mentioned earlier that the island-based fishery management plans were also a source of information. And so, across all three of the island-based fishery management plans, I looked for common themes across those goals with respect to management, and all three of the fishery management plans have goals about healthy, sustainable island fisheries, healthy fishing communities, maintaining local ecosystem productivity, ensuring that management measures reflect that local ecosystem productivity, but also consider the needs of island fishing communities. So that's what these different alternatives are about, is advancing management approaches that will provide for healthy, sustainable fisheries, account for local ecosystem productivity, and consider the needs of island fishing communities. And so again, the council will be reviewing those at the end of April. And so moving on to the island specific objectives. So you all might remember this particular table. So I showed this to the council at their December meeting. And so these were all the different management and operational issues that you all discussed during your August input sessions. And what I've highlighted here in yellow are those priorities selected by the DAPs and the council that were common across all four bodies. The issues highlighted in gray are those that were common across three different bodies. So I think what I want to draw your attention to is that there's quite a bit of overlap in those priorities that were selected, particularly by the district advisory panels. So with that, I'm going to move into the draft management objectives. And so the first is support the development of accurate, timely, and cost-effective data collection, reporting, and monitoring programs. And I've just noted here that there's 5 potential strategies that we'll take a look at later, but this is really, you all had a pretty robust discussion about the importance of data collection and information, particularly having accurate catch data. So this objective is meant to be broad enough to include not only commercial and recreational catch data, but also other types of data such as fishery independent data, fishery dependent data, such as commercial and recreational sampling programs. And so just as an example, a couple of strategies, potential strategies under this objective would be, supporting NOAA fisheries and the USVI DPNR efforts to improve, recreational reporting and establish like a marine recreational information program survey in St. Croix. You also talked about, potential modifications to licensing requirements or improving licensing requirements. So supporting those efforts would be another strategy. Collaborating with DPNR on education or outreach regarding accurate catch reporting, things like that. The next draft objective is promote fisher involvement and other collaborative research approaches to meeting island-specific science and information needs. So again, fisher involvement in data collection was one of the priorities that you mentioned, but it's also, I think, important to make sure this objective is broad enough to not only include fishers, but other collaborators such as academic institutions, and even other agencies beyond NOAA fisheries. So just as an example, a couple of strategies might be to, collaborate with science partners and fishers to develop a St. Croix specific list of research needs, or, supporting research by academic partners to improve data limited species assessments, supporting NOAA fisheries efforts to, conduct gear selectivity studies in St. Croix, things like that. The third draft objective is ensure that management measures encourage regulatory compliance and foster effective enforcement. So, there was some conversation about, the importance of regulatory compliance. We did have some conversation about, potential consistency of territorial management measures with federal management measures. So this, this speaks to some of that, but potential strategies that could meet this objective would be, coordinating with NOAA's Office of Law Enforcement as well as DPNR to, review the consistency of existing regulations, or, supporting outreach efforts that might cross-train enforcement personnel, developing like clear, understandable compliance guides for commercial and recreational fishers. So, that's just a few examples of potential strategies. And then the final draft management objective is collaborate with domestic and international partners to promote adaptive and efficient management that considers diverse community interests. And so, again, this is based on some of your conversation, but also some of the draft objectives that you have in the St. Croix Island-based fishery management plan. So, for example, working with NOAA Fisheries and DPNR to reduce bycatch through things like seasonal and gear modifications, working to develop consistent regulations where appropriate, ensuring that management measures accommodate the local ecosystem productivity, and things like involving the Fisheries Advisory Committee in review and development of management measures to try to evaluate commercial and recreational community impacts. So one of the other things that came out as a priority was balancing commercial and recreational concerns. And so that's something that can be incorporated as a strategy within this draft management objective of, promoting adaptive and efficient management that, considers diverse community interests. So the next goal theme area is ecosystem and ocean health. And so, ecosystem and resource health. And so these are just the draft alternatives. So we want to make sure that these capture a lot of the ecosystem-based fishery management work that you all have been doing through the development of the fishery ecosystem plan, as well as the some of the goals that are in the island-based fishery management plans that speak to the need to, maintain ecosystem structure and function, maintain ecosystem resiliency. So, these different alternatives are meant to capture the concepts about, supporting ecologically sustainable uses and maintaining healthy marine resources, providing for ecosystem structure and function, promoting that ecosystem productivity. And so, these also encapsulate, I think, a lot of the habitat concerns that you all have talked about as well. And so the draft island specific, well, I'll back up a little bit. So this table shows the different top 5 priorities that were selected by the district advisory panels, as well as by the council. And you can see that enforcement was a priority that was selected by all, whereas there was a lot of concerns with respect to habitat impacts, erosion and sedimentation, illegal fishing, climate change. So the draft island-specific ecosystem and resource health objectives for St. Croix, the first is implement the fishery ecosystem plan as a roadmap for future council actions to maintain the ecological relationships, roles, and services of the St. Croix Island ecosystem. So again, we want to make sure that all of the work that you all are doing on the development of the fishery ecosystem plan and the development of the different island conceptual models is captured. And in this strategic plan, this also draws from some of your objectives that are in the island-based fishery management plan as well. And so just as an example, a couple of a couple of strategies to meet this objective would be things like collaborating with science partners to, identify gaps and improve biological and ecosystem information for St. Croix. One of the other things that all the DAPs had a big discussion about was, the impacts of closed seasons and closed areas and getting stock assessments for those seasons and areas. So another potential strategy would be, evaluating those existing spawning closures, in closed areas, specifically like mutton snapper, Lang Bank, even, the Easton Marine Park, to determine what the contributions are of those closures to ecosystem integrity. So that's just a couple examples. The next draft objective is identify, manage, and protect coral reef and other fishery resource habitats that support ecosystem structure and function. And so oh, sorry, I think I skipped ahead a little bit. So the second draft objective is identify, manage, and protect coral reef and other fishery resource habitats of St. Croix. So again, this encompasses a lot of the conversation that you all had about things like sedimentation and erosion and pollution. So those are all issues that that impact the habitats that are important to the fishery resources that the council manages. So some example strategies to meet this objective are things like, developing council habitat policies that address, the impacts of coastal development, erosion and sedimentation, and other forms of pollution on, essential fish habitats in and around St. Croix. You all talked about modifications to the coastal zone regulations. So another potential strategy could be to support modifications to the territorial coastal zone regulations that impact these habitats or reduce sedimentation and erosion. Making sure that your essential fish habitat designations account for the ecological roles and relationships of different species. So that's what that second objective is about. The third objective is encourage efforts to create and rehabilitate fishery resource habitats that support ecosystem structure and function. So, one of the priorities that you all brought forward was this idea of habitat loss and destruction and creation and rehabilitation. And so some potential strategies to meet this objective could be to, work with federal and territorial management partners to identify opportunities for habitat enhancement, making sure that those habitat restoration needs for St. Croix are communicated to NOAA's Office of Habitat Conservation grant programs. There was conversation about the impacts of invasive species. And so, exploring opportunities to address the impacts of invasive species on St. Croix fishery habitats is another potential strategy. The fourth draft objective is to collaborate with management partners to address enforcement concerns that may affect ecological relationships. So again, you all had a pretty robust discussion about enforcement, and both enforcement and illegal fishing were two of the top 5 issues that you all selected under this theme area. So, again, this could, some potential strategies could be conducting outreach with NOAA's Office of Law Enforcement, as well as the Department of Planning and Natural Resources enforcement personnel regarding the ecological impacts of illegal fishing activities, as well as the, conducting outreach to other management agencies on the potential impacts of, non-fishing activities or development on ecosystem structure and function. Excuse me. And then finally, the last draft objective is collaborate with management partners to ensure that ecosystem approaches are responsive to climate change. So climate change was one of your top 5. This is something that could potentially be incorporated under this first objective, dealing with the fishery ecosystem plan. But, again, some potential strategies would be to evaluate the flexibility of, current management approaches to climate change impacts and, potentially working with the broader Caribbean community to, identify what those potential impacts are from climate change. So now moving on to moving on to the next theme area, which is social, cultural, and economic objectives. And so these are the three goal area statement alternatives. Across all three of the island-based fishery management plans, there was an emphasis on, ensuring that there was fair and equitable resource use that was promoted, that the needs of the different unique island fishing communities were considered when making management decisions. And so that's what these three different alternatives are meant to reflect. And so again, this is the table of all of the different social, cultural, and economic issues that you all discussed back at the end of August. And you can see highlighted in yellow, there's a lot of overlap here and within this issue area. One of the big issues, as I mentioned earlier, that all three of the DAPs discussed was this idea of closed seasons and stock assessments for affected species and evaluation of those closures. And so, that's an issue that crosses multiple theme areas. So it has, management implications in terms of, making sure that we're, reviewing the effectiveness of those management measures. It has science implications, making sure that we have the data collected to, assess the health of those species impacted by those closures. And then, obviously there are potential economic impacts here as well. And so these are the draft social, cultural, and economic objectives for St. Croix. So, the first is to promote the collection of social and economic data that informs management decisions. And so one potential strategy could be to engage, the council's science partners as well as SSC to identify and prioritize social and economic data gaps and research priorities for St. Croix, making sure that organizations like Sea Grant, incorporate those priorities into funding opportunities and using, existing studies like the studies that are being completed on the impacts of Hurricanes Irma and Maria, as well as the ongoing COVID-19 assessments to, using information from those. The second draft objective is evaluate the social, cultural, and economic impacts of management decisions and actions across user groups. And so, one of the things that was mentioned that you all also had in an earlier set of discussions was, balancing commercial and recreational interests. And so, this objective speaks to that as well. But also, this is one of those places where, we can, work with ensuring that that management measures such as the current closed areas are incorporated into decision making, that those economic impacts and cultural impacts of those closed seasons are assessed. Strategies like that. And then the third is consider the impacts of enforcement and illegal fishing on economic opportunity and social well-being. And so, you all had a lot of conversation about the impact of illegal fishing on the health of resources. And so, this objective is meant to try to get at that. So a couple of example strategies that could meet this would be to, work with management partners to determine where additional enforcement might, improve economic conditions or trust among commercial and recreational user groups. Also collaborating with science partners to try to document some of the economic impacts of illegal and unlicensed sales of fish in St. Croix. So again, just a couple of examples here. One of the things I did want to point out is that there is, as I mentioned before, there are a lot of overlaps between the 3 different island-specific objectives because of the overlaps in the priorities that you all selected, as well as in the draft the goals and objectives that are within the island-based fishery management plans. And so, one of the draft objectives that was included in the St. Thomas, St. John was, promoting efforts that support social and economic opportunity and stability across sectors and fishing communities. And that was really driven by, that advisory panel's conversation about improvements in fishing infrastructure, including landing and market sites, and the use of social media and other virtual approaches to marketing their locally caught species. And so, I just bring that up. We can talk about that as you all, review these and provide feedback on these different draft objectives. And again, not that economic stability isn't something that everybody wants, but it was, these ideas of infrastructure and market stability were specifically discussed by the St. Thomas St. John DAP. So I just mentioned that. And then finally, we get to the last goal area, which is the communication and outreach. And so these are the 3 different goal statement alternatives. And these would try to incorporate sort of three different goals or concepts, which is, making sure that we've got the right, that we're using the appropriate tools, trying to increase participation in the council process, and then also, expanding and exploring other ways to continue the council's outreach and education efforts. So we're really trying to, foster engagement in the process, making sure that we improve public understanding and education, and then, that we're using a variety of tools. So again, these are just the topics that you all talked about during your meetings back in August, was, the frequency of communication, the variety of tools that were used, educational resources, improving general public awareness, clarity and simplicity of presentations, trying to, expand communications to other groups, going back to in-person outreach workshops, when we can safely do that, or trying to figure out some creative ways to do that. And then a lot of conversation on expanding the role of fishery liaisons, beyond sort of what has been maybe their current participation on the OEAP. And there were several ideas mentioned about that. So, this has all informed the development of the following 3 objectives, which were to use a variety of communication tools that consider the social, cultural, and economic characteristics of target audiences. And so there's a lot of different potential strategies here on this, but some examples are, continuing use of the council's social media platforms, and exploring other avenues like online and app-based technologies such as WhatsApp or email templates to, send reminders, making sure that we have a good catalog of communities and individuals that have preferences and a need for traditional media tools because they perhaps do not have access to internet or a cell phone, making sure that we maintain the content of the website for folks who prefer to use that as a tool to get their information, accounting for stakeholder language preferences and the materials that the council uses, coordinating with other management partners and organizations to, just expand the scope of the communications, things like that. The second draft objective is promote participation of a variety of stakeholders in the council process. And so, so things like we talked about increasing the frequency of communications in advance of a council event or meeting, expanding the use of webinars and conference lines as another way to provide for additional access or education. So for example, holding an educational webinar, making sure that meetings and events are scheduled so that we can encourage maximum participation, issue-specific online comment forums, et cetera. And then the third objective is really focused on the education and outreach component, which the OEAP has done a tremendous job of over the past several years. And so this is improve public and stakeholder understanding and awareness of fisheries management, current issues, and the council process. And so again, this includes things like continued support of the Marine Resource Education Program workshops, expanding the role of the fishery liaisons, coordinating with management partners to improve the clarity and simplicity of presentations so that people feel comfortable participating in the process, things like that. And so what we're looking for now is feedback from the DAP on, are the draft island specific objectives not only specific enough, but are they comprehensive enough to incorporate the range of priority issues for each island district? So I've tried to provide a little bit of context for the development of these objectives between your feedback late last summer, as well as the goals and objectives that are within the St. Croix island-based fishery management plan. And so, Mr. Chairman, we can take feedback whenever you all might be ready.
Eddie, what we have done with the other two is that we allow Dr. Duval to go slide by slide, and she will start with the beginning, and there will be in each slide you have seen the language for the objective based on previous meetings with the St. Croix DAP. So we can go slide by slide, allow people to take a turn, especially the DAP members. And when you start talking, please identify yourself with your name and affiliation. For example, Eddie Schuster, DAP chair, and so forth. And after each slide presentation, the chair will then ask, is there any changes or suggestion for changes? If not, then it's considered as adopted, the language as adopted by the DAP.
Okay, before we move on, Miguel, sorry to interrupt you. Via text, Vernon Brown asked to be excused. He's attending a funeral off island for a family member, and Daly is also present with Carlos right now.
Excellent. Duly noted for the record.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, give me just a minute to adjust one of my extra slides. I've found that there is an error in that, and so I just want to correct that before we go over that. Is that okay? I just need a couple minutes. Thank you.
Let us know when.
I'm just going to stop sharing. So,
okay. While Dr. Duval is fixing the slide, remember that we have a meeting of the DAPs on April 19 and 20. In the case of St. Croix, that will be the afternoon of the 19th. The meeting will be in the agenda for the meeting. There will be only two topics: the latest model, or a consistent model that will be presented by Graciela Garcia Moliner, and then the island-based FMP update by Maria del Mar. If by that time the the island-based FMP are implemented, which I doubt very much because of the COVID, we are behind, then Maria de Mar and the staff will ask you for input. Mostly what we would like to hear from you, you started talking about possible amendments to the St. Croix FMP. So please think about it and bring it to the discussion of the meeting. That would be followed by a council meeting on the 27th and the 28th. And then after this meeting, Dr. Duval will have another one that will include all the comments received today and all the comments, each DAP will have the same agenda, and that will be in June. That will be announced whenever Dr. Duval finish updating the strategic plan, and then we will send you a note for that meeting. It will be first, second week of June. I guess she's ready now.
Thank you, Miguel, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for that. So as Miguel indicated, we'll go through these slide by slide. So we start with the management objectives, and I did spend a little bit, of time reviewing the, potential strategies. But again, what we're really focused on here is ensuring that, these draft objectives, so there's a couple more on the next slide, are specific enough but comprehensive enough. And so, any feedback that you have on that, I'm not going to would be appreciated. So this is support the development of accurate, timely, and cost-effective data collection, reporting, and monitoring programs. And you can see up on the screen some of the potential strategies. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. It's not set in stone, and we'll be reviewing these and providing additional feedback on those, as well as any additions or modifications, deletions, subtractions that you all want to provide. And similarly with the second objective, promote fisher involvement and other collaborative research approaches to meeting island-specific science and information needs.
Hello, this is Marcia Taylor. On the first one, could we include implementation, not just the development, but the development and implementation of accurate, timely, blah, blah, blah?
Yes. Implementation. How's that?
Good, thank you.
Yep, thank you, Marcia.
Then Eddie, we need to ask the group if they agree with that new language, and if they want to also submit any other suggestion on each one of the objectives.
Any other questions, or would anybody else like to add anything on to this objective for the first slide? If not, we'd adopt the language as is.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. But again, any comments are welcome. The second objective is, again, promoting fisher involvement and other collaborative research approaches to meeting island-specific science and information needs. And so some of the potential strategies down here were taken from a presentation that I think Kevin McCarthy with the Southeast Fisheries Science Center, provided to the council. I believe it might have been back in June of last year, trying to outline all of the different research and science initiatives that the Science Center is engaged in. But obviously we can fill this out more.
Any other questions, or anybody would like to add anything in the second objective? Hearing none, we adopt the language.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hello,
Oh,
this is Patricia Scow, DAP St. Croix. Just with this one with the strategies, like that, I see the National Park Service listed in supporting us, and I'm just questioning that the for St. Croix, that Buck Island's buoys be redone so that they mark the area correctly, because right now they're not really marked correctly.
Okay, so that's how's that? I just want to make sure that the strategy, you know, can also include other areas in addition to Buck Island if there's a need for that. Does that look okay?
Pat, is that what you wanted?
That looks fine. Any closed area that we can mark off would be great. So I think that's good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Any other?
Adoptions to this language?
Yes, a question. This is Toby Tobias. Do we need to be more specific on the research needs for St. Croix, or leave it as broad as it states?
So Toby, that's a great question. I think for this strategy, you know, that's how the council would, you know, meet this objective of fisher involvement and collaborative research is, you know, developing a St. Croix specific list of research needs. I think that list of needs would be part of an implementation plan. So you would say, you know, research need A, B, C, D, E. So I think that would be part of an implementation plan. And, you know, that's something that we haven't talked about very much yet, but that is part of the development of a strategic plan, is also to work with the council to develop that first implementation plan, which would include activities in that specificity.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Toby. It's a great question.
Any other from the DAP members? Hearing none, we adopt the language as is and move on to the next one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So these are the next two draft management objectives. The first is ensure that management measures encourage regulatory compliance and foster effective enforcement. Again, you all had a very robust discussion about this, and enforcement of existing regulations was, you know, one of your top 5 priorities. There's also language in a couple of your draft island-based fishery management plan objectives that also speak to enforcement and, you know, trying to ensure that stakeholders understand the regulations specifically.
Hi, this is Marcia Taylor. I was going to address the second one. Do you want us to?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, collaborate with domestic and international partners to promote adaptive and efficient management. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether this was an appropriate place to say efficient management that considers climate change as well as diverse community interests.
So I think that's the point of promoting adaptive management, so that you want it to be responsive to things like climate change. And I know that as part of the next set of draft objectives, which deal with ecosystem and resource health, that, you know, one of those strategies is also ensuring that ecosystem-based approaches are responsive to climate change. So I think maybe, let's see, we've got in here, consistent regulations, accommodate local. So I think maybe as an additional strategy, you would also want to, ensure that management measures consider or, address the potential impacts of climate change. Does that sound okay, Marcia? And
Yeah,
incorporating
yeah,
that more as a
Yeah, I
strategy?
know it doesn't really fit in with that thing, but then I didn't see it in any of the other objectives, but as long as it's in there, that's great.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. Thank you.
This is Mike Funk. Could you add in their invasive species as well?
So Mike, consider the impacts of invasive species on management approach, or let's see, how about maybe ensure that management approaches consider the impacts of invasive species. Would that, I know this is also in one of the next, as a strategy and one of the next objectives under ecosystem and resource health as well.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Mike.
For the record, I'd like to recognize Mike Fuller, just logged on via audio.
Thank you, Eddie.
Any other adoptions to the language in this objective?
Excuse me, this is Patricia Scow from St. Croix. Are we considering both objectives in this case?
Yes, ma'am. If you have any thoughts on either of these two objectives, we welcome that.
I'm fine with it. I just wanted to make sure that we're going to adopt both with the changes.
Well, if there are, Mr. Chairman, if there are no additional thoughts or comments, I can move on to the next one if you'd like.
Yes, let's adopt this language and move on to the next objective.
Thank you. Okay, so the next two draft objectives have to do with ecosystem and resource health. And so, that first objective is implement the fishery ecosystem plan as a roadmap for future council actions to maintain the ecological relationships, roles, and services of the St. Croix ecosystem. And so, again, this also has, collaborating with science partners to identify, those gaps in ecosystem information for St. Croix, evaluating the existing spawning closures and closed areas, so Langbank, there are mutton snapper closed seasons, I believe, and closed areas, as well as others, to determine their contributions to ecosystem integrity. And I think, Marcia, this was also, ensuring that any ecosystem-based approaches are responsive to climate change. So trying to get that in there as well.
Would it make sense to add, Edward Schuster for the record, Chairman? Would it make sense to add in their juvenile habitat restoration?
Ooh, so I think that might be, you mean like down in the second one here about identify, manage, and protect coral reef and other fishery resource habitats? Oops.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned which objective or the second one, yes.
I was reading your mind, Eddie. It's okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so let me add that, maybe this will just kind of be a placeholder. Again, all the language and these potential strategies is something we'll review again, but I just want to make sure I capture the idea. So, ensure that, let's see, juvenile habitats are sufficiently protected. Does that kind of get to what you're thinking about, Mr. Chairman?
That's broad enough, but it's just to put it in there.
Yeah, and so the other thing I'll draw your attention to is there's also this one to ensure that essential fish habitat designations account for ecological roles and relationships. So you would also incorporate juvenile needs in there too.
Okay.
This is Marcia again. On the second one, could we add to identify, manage, protect, and restore coral reef and other fishery resource habitats?
Yes, hang on just a minute, let me see. So this is the next objective that we're getting to, which was encourage efforts to create and rehabilitate fishery resource habitats that support ecosystem structure and function. Does that maybe speak to your idea, Marcia?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Okay, yeah. No, it's hard. I couldn't cram all these onto one slide each. So are there any other thoughts or feedback on these two draft objectives before we move on to the next ones?
This is Mike Funk again, and partners and stakeholders. Does that include some of the volunteer organizations, NGOs like CORE Foundation, TNC, SEA, some of those groups?
Are you talking about up here, like when it says collaborate with science partners and stakeholders?
Correct.
Okay, yes, it does. I mean, I have a broad view of the term stakeholders, but we can also add in here that we are also talking about, other NGOs, TNC, I think he said CORE, was that it?
Correct, CORE.
Okay, just to make sure that, we're capturing that. I know sometimes, and I would also include in here, commercial and recreational fishers as well. I just want to, stakeholder is a broad term, but I think you raise a great point that we want to make sure that we're being inclusive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Michelle, this is Toby Tobias once again. On the second one, in terms of the potential strategies, I think we also need to emphasize to research the undeveloped and underutilized fisheries resources as a means of reducing impact on coral reef resources.
Okay, so reducing or research underutilized fishery resources, was that what you're saying? Is it to try to pull pressure away from perhaps overused resources?
Yes, correct.
So I'm wondering, Toby, if that might not fit a little bit better under here, under one of these management objectives, like maybe under the adaptive and efficient management. I think there are a couple different places that we could put it. So maybe here, explore underutilized species as a means to reduce pressure on currently, maybe, I don't want to, or fully utilized species. So I think there's a place for it there, but then again, also, let's see, there might be, I'm wondering if that might fit better up here as part of the fishery ecosystem plan rather than under this objective that's more specific to habitat. What do you think, Toby?
Seems like it could go several places.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let's see. Let's see.
I think the key here is that these are underdeveloped and underutilized fisheries resources that we need to be looking at.
To reduce pressure and maintain ecological relationships. So I know it's a little bit hard to see this. Let me see if I can just reduce this a little bit. It might be pretty tiny, but what I did was like explore use of underutilized and underdeveloped species. Also put in here resources to reduce pressure and maintain ecological relationships. So it sort of speaks to the ecosystem as a whole. Does that sound okay for now, Toby? And then when we have that meeting in June, we can revisit this.
Yes, I think that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else on these two objectives before we move on?
Anybody else? Hearing none, we adopt the language, move on to the next objective.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is what Marcia was speaking about earlier, but so you have 3 draft objectives here. The first is encourage efforts to create and rehabilitate fishery resource habitats that support ecosystem structure and function. And again, this whole idea of habitat loss and creation was something that all 3 of the district advisory panels talked about pretty extensively. The next draft objective is collaborate with management partners to address enforcement concerns that may affect ecological relationships. Again, enforcement and illegal fishing were two of the top 5 issues that you all identified back in August. And then the last of these draft objectives is collaborate with management partners to ensure that ecosystem approaches are responsive to climate change. And again, climate change was one of your one of the top priorities under this theme for you all. And I know we've added a couple things with respect to climate change and ensuring that management measures are responsive to that. But we want to make sure that our ecosystem approaches are explicitly responsive to that as well.
Good morning, this is Mike Fuller.
Hi, Mike.
Could we or should we put in here climate change / environmental changes?
We can certainly do that. Let's hang on a minute. How does that work?
Yeah, it's just, it might not necessarily be climate change, but it may be hurricane related or some other factor.
So were you thinking like replace climate with environmental change?
No, I think climate change is good in there, but environmental changes may not necessarily be related to climate change, whether it's, you know, upland building or, you know, something runoff, something like that, that it may not necessarily be climate alone.
Gotcha. Okay. So does that addition of and environmental address that or make that broad enough to incorporate that?
In my mind, yes, but you know, I'm just one member, so. What's the rest of the committee feel? Do we need to insert that?
It might be that no answer means yes.
Yeah, I'm fine with it, Mike. I was repeating what was written. I'm fine with that. Anybody else?
I'm
like to
fine with
add?
it.
Thanks, Pat.
Toby Tobias, once again, on the top one, should we not have rehabilitate first before create? I mean, that's the objective, is to take what we have that can be improved before creating something new.
Yes, we can absolutely change that around. Let's see. How about that?
Yeah,
Would it be better simply to rehabilitate and or create? Would that?
Oops.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Hi, this is Patricia Scow again from St. Croix. On the, where it says to investigate the potential of fads to mitigate habitat loss. What about investigate and to deploy fads?
So that might be. How about that, Patricia? Investigate the potential of fads to mitigate habitat losses and deploy fads where appropriate.
That sounds good to me. Thank you.
Yep.
This is Mike Funk again. So right now there's some very significant diseases killing a lot of the coral, and there's several groups that are working on that. I'm not exactly sure how to incorporate that in there, but something about again working with other partners in terms of coral restoration. Okay, I'm not going to hang this floor right now.
So maybe Mike, let's see, in this first one where it says maybe work with federal.
Right here. Just go ahead and wrap it. You can come to this side if you want, but leave it loose.
I'm hearing somebody in the background.
Well, that might be of people working on my house. I'll put
Oh,
it
okay,
on mute
sorry.
again, sorry.
That's okay. So Mike, let's see, what about work with federal, territorial, federal, and let's see, federal, territorial, management, let's see, and I want to make sure we get like, and other management partners to identify opportunities for habitat enhancement and maybe and restoration, because you're talking about like coral diseases.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Okay.
This is Marcia. Do you need the word management there? Because some of these organizations might not be management partners.
I know, that's what I was struggling with, like work with federal and federal, let's see, I think maybe federal and territorial, maybe agencies, and then we can take management out of there.
Well, you could put management in front of that one, but the next one, you don't want to exclude non-management.
So, you know, federal and territorial agencies and management other partners and maybe other organizations. Management partners and other organizations. Does that maybe capture it?
Do you even need organizations? Can't you just say and others?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Mike, does that still capture what you were trying to say?
That is pretty non-specific. I think that, you know, leaves it open for just about anybody. Thank you.
So Marcia, are you okay with other organizations again?
Okay, I don't think Mike was talking against organizations, were you, Mike?
Correct.
I think
I like it. I like it being, you know, not non-specific. So, you know, leaving out the word organizations. It's okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I misunderstood. Thank you. Okay, anything else on this?
Hearing none from the DAP members, any others for the objectives? If not, we'll move on, adopt the language and move on.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll go ahead and move on. We're almost done here. So these are the draft social, cultural, and economic objectives. So the first is promote the collection of social and economic data that informs management decisions. The second is evaluate the social, cultural, and economic impacts of management decisions, actions across user groups. And that text is underlined because that was the text that I had to fix that. It was erroneously duplicated from this top set of strategies down here again. So I just want to make sure that was fixed. And then the last objective, draft objective of consider the impacts of enforcement and illegal fishing on economic opportunity and social well-being. And so, you know, again, inadequate enforcement and illegal unlicensed commercial fisheries were, you know, two of the top 5 priorities, you know, that were identified, as well as recreational and commercial user conflicts. So I've tried to capture the different user conflicts in a couple of these strategies here. And then let's see, as well as down here, improving trust among user groups. And then, you all also spoke about the lack of social and economic data. That was also one of your top 5 priorities, as well as the closed seasons and assessments for affected species. And so, that is incorporated here, this review and document the social and economic impacts of existing St. Croix closed seasons and spawning areas on for hire and commercial for hire and recreational stakeholders. So just trying to, address everything that you all discussed, but making sure that, it fits within objectives. And again, this is, well, I will stop there and just see what feedback you all have on these.
Toby Tobias, once again, on the last objective, I think we need to state, consider the impacts of inadequate regulation, enforcement, and illegal fishing.
Can you still read that, Toby? Consider the impacts of inadequate regulation?
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
Okay.
This might funk again. The science partners, what does that mean?
So when I say science partners, and so you're probably talking about like up here as well as down here. I might have a little room to be more specific up here, but I'm thinking about the Southeast Fisheries Science Center as well as Sea Grant and academic researchers, anybody who has the capacity to engage in the council process or become involved and help the council to meet its science and information needs. That's what I mean by science partners.
Thank you.
Record. Toby, can you elaborate on what you meant by inadequate regulations?
Mike, I was thinking about, the ability of recreational fishers to sell their catch directly to restaurants and hotels.
Okay, I gotcha.
Michelle, Toby Tobias, once again, on the first one, just under potential strategies, there are a number of science partners that have been conducting social and economic studies down here. Some of them being conducted at the same time without local DPNR agencies engaged or knowledge of. How do we entertain this?
I'm thinking, so let's see, how about ensure that new or existing social economic studies collaborate, coordinate with USVI, DPNR. Does that maybe address it?
I think that does address it. When this occurs, there's usually a lot of confusion in the fishing community and typically results in a lack of assistance following that locally.
Okay. So maybe we can work on fleshing this out a little bit more when we have our meeting in June, or being a little bit more specific. But I think I've captured it enough here that we've got at least a good placeholder.
Can you add the word science in their socioeconomic science studies?
Does that look okay for now?
Looks good for me.
Okay.
Hi, this is Marcia. And one of the things that frustrates me is there's a lot of these studies going that happen, but people don't know about. So is there some way we can put in not just promoting the collection, but also the dissemination of the information so that, you know, people can get at it and see what it is?
Let's see. Oh, here we go. Up in the objective. Sorry, Marcia. The collection.
Well, I was thinking, but someplace.
Do you think it fits okay there, or would you prefer to see that, you know, as more of a strategy, and we're about to launch into the communication and outreach draft objectives as well?
Yeah, I don't care where it is, as long as it's in there someplace.
Okay. What does the rest of the group think? Collection and dissemination of social and economic data that informs management decisions?
Yes, Edward Schuster, for the record, is always a black hole in studies that are being done,
Okay.
or closed areas that have been implemented. And we never know what the status of the study is, or if an evaluation has been done on these closed areas. But I'd also like to add, this is Toby's correction or addition to the last section. And it's just maybe a shout out to Toby to see if the word inadequate, probably to me, when I read it, sends the wrong message, like there are not enough regulations. And I don't know if that's why Mike questioned it also, but can we say or use a word, maybe conflict? Consider the impacts of the conflict between recreational versus commercial fishing. I'm not sure, Toby, this was yours. So, and I don't know if that's where Mike questioned it as well, but for verification, I don't know.
How about just saying non-regulation?
That would work. Inadequate sends a message like, you know, we don't have enough, or we don't have a regulation for that specifically. But yeah, non-regulatory or non-regulation. Yeah, fine, better. Any other comments or additions to comments that were made?
Mike Fuller for the record. The first line, I think, is fine. And you are correct, as why I was asking about the inadequate regulations.
Well, great. Thank you for that, more specific feedback, everyone. Anything else on this? again, we'll have more opportunity to examine and work on potential strategies in June.
If we don't have any others, can we adopt the language group? Hearing none, adopt the language as is and move on.
Okay, so we're in the home stretch here. So these are the draft communication and outreach objectives. And, the first deals with communication tools. So this is use a variety of communication tools that consider the social, cultural, and economic characteristics of target audiences. We had lots of conversation about this. I think some of the feedback that we got from the St. Thomas St. John DAP yesterday, and that the Puerto Rico DAP also thought might be good was there was some additional language here added that was in coordination with the OEAP, which is the council's outreach and education advisory panel. So I'll just put that out there and see what y'all think about that addition. I think the thought was that, the OEAP has really been instrumental in, developing a plan and moving forward with exploring new tools. Thanks to the work of Christina Olan, the council's social media presence has expanded tremendously. So the concern from St. Thomas St. John was just that they wanted to make sure that everything was coordinated, that the council didn't sort of run off in one direction while its advisory panel was focused perhaps in a different direction.
I would agree with that going forward for the record.
Anyone else? Any other thoughts? And again, there's a whole bunch of potential strategies here that are, talking about all the different types of tools, both, electronic, social media, traditional media. This DAP in particular brought up, the need to ensure that stakeholder language preferences are identified, coordinating with other partners to make sure we're getting the word out to a broader array of stakeholders. And I think that was something that this DAP talked specifically about. And then some of the feedback we got from our comment form was to consider sector-specific and boat-friendly communication materials so that these fishers could take these communication materials on a boat and they wouldn't be destroyed by the elements.
Any additional comments to this? Adopt the language as is, moving along.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the next one is promote participation of a variety of stakeholders in the council process. So, all of these potential strategies are about, just trying to increase the different types of folks who are participating in the council process, and also, not only through education and outreach, which is the next objective, but really making sure that our communications are also, encouraging that participation. So, increasing the frequency of communications in advance of I should say, in advance of council meetings and events. And then, using a variety of different communication tools to advertise and remind folks of those meetings, perhaps expanding the use of our electronic tools to provide greater access and participation and even education, hosting an educational webinar if there's some, say either, social or economic or ecological research that's specific to the US Caribbean that we want to make sure stakeholders are aware of. Considering issue-specific online comment forms that, allows for other opportunities for public input if people aren't able to actually, attend a meeting or a webinar in person, promoting, collaborative development and management approaches through issue-specific workshops, developing a newsletter or a summary to highlight council meeting outcomes and anticipated actions. And just note that there is a February newsletter that the council put out, and it is focused on one of St. Croix, longtime commercial fisherman, and I believe Carlos Farchete, contributed greatly to that. So just encourage folks to read that if they haven't had a chance.
Well, this is Mike Funk. How do we access that?
If you go to Miguel or Natalia, one of you all might want to address that, but I think I went to the council's website and clicked on news, and it was, if you scroll down, there was a February newsletter there. Miguel?
Yes, that's the way we do it. It's in the webpage.
Good question. I had no idea it was there. Thank you.
Yeah, if you don't find anything, just please contact Diana, and if we don't know, if we don't have it, we will fetch it for you.
Perhaps it should be emailed to all the DAP members.
Yeah, we can do that too. Yeah, Diana, make a note so we can send it to the DAP members.
It was a really nice piece, I will say that. Well, if there's no feedback right now on this, Mr. Chairman, do you want to move along?
Yeah, adopt the language as is and move on.
Okay. So this is the last one. This is really focused on the outreach and education aspect of what the council does. So this is improve public and stakeholder understanding and awareness of fisheries management, current issues in the council process. So all of the DAPs and the council had a very robust discussion about, the need to improve just general public knowledge of the council process and fisheries issues. A lot of conversation about expanding the role of the fisheries liaisons to include things like, in order to improve public knowledge and awareness, but including things like, making visits to, conducting outreach, in-person outreach to fishers at market sites in conjunction with a DAP member, continuing to support things like the marine resource education programs, partnering with other organizations like PEPCO and Sea Grant, as well as federal agencies to distribute, educational and outreach materials, as well as excuse me, continuing to, support just the efforts of those organizations in general. One of the other things that came up was partnering with organizations to capture, traditional ecological knowledge of US Caribbean fishing communities. Let's see, making sure we're distributing our materials to other marine resource users and the general public through partnerships with these other organizations. Obviously conducting in-person outreach and workshops to improve engagement in the process. It's been a little tough over the past year or so to try to do things like that, but I know that the council would like to get back to that in as safe a manner as possible, whenever they are able to do so. And, another thing that we had a lot of conversation about was, people feel, they don't always feel comfortable participating in the council process because sometimes the presentations are, not that clear and, not that understandable for the general public. So, one of the potential strategies is to coordinate with, management and science partners to improve the clarity and simplicity of presentations to improve public understanding. So, making sure that those council presentations are easily understood. And another one that I did also want to highlight was, developing outreach approaches and materials specific to recreational anglers. So this was something, that was brought forward by the OEAP specifically, that this is a user group that, probably needs some additional outreach. So Mr. Sherman, I'll stop there and see if folks have any feedback.
This is Mike Funk. For divers, there are dive clubs. I know in St. Croix, there's a dive club called Crabs that a lot of recreational divers are members of, quite a few. I don't know if the recreational anglers have a similar group, but is there some way to include that?
So, let's see. I'm wondering if partnering with other outreach organizations and maybe, to develop and distribute these educational materials to, fishers, other marine resource users, the general public. I'm wondering if perhaps in here, we could say, and, commercial and recreational fishing organizations.
Add the word diving organizations, maybe too.
Okay, commercial and recreational fishing. Oops.
Mike Fuller, for the record, maybe also put in there something about boating. Commercial, recreational, fishing, diving, boating organizations.
Commercial, recreational fishing, diving, and boating organizations. Great addition. We've captured the whole world of on the water users.
Hi, this is Marcia. Could you explain to me what is the organization PEPCO? I've never heard of them.
I'm gonna defer to Miguel and Christina because I can't remember exactly what the acronym stands for off the top of my head, but it's like the program for the education of commercial fishers. It's Programa de.
Okay, so it's a Puerto Rico thing.
It is.
Programa de Educación para Pescadores Comerciales.
Thank you, Christina.
Okay.
You're very welcome.
All right, great. And then my other thing is you talk about, when you talk about recreational fishers and you say specific to recreational fishers, what about specific to island-based fisheries? So in other words, the issues on St. Croix might be very different from the ones in Puerto Rico, and maybe we need different types of outreach or materials for that.
Okay, so let's see, develop outreach approaches and materials specific to, let's see, maybe develop island-specific outreach approaches and materials for recreational anglers?
But not just for recreational, for any kind of fisher.
So you said specific to island-based recreational anglers, but did you also wanted to add commercial in there?
Yes, any kind of fisher. Because, we're going to have issues here that aren't the same as other places, and they need to be addressed differently.
And so, are you saying issues specific to St. Croix or just island communities in general? I just want to make sure.
Island-based fisheries. So St. Croix versus Puerto Rico versus St. Thomas.
so that different approaches would be needed for each island.
They might be.
Okay. I'm going to move this around a little bit then. Island specific. Outreach approaches and materials, maybe.
This is Toby Tobias. Are we being a little bit redundant with what was underlined down below? Can we not add something to the below line that encompasses what is trying to be said?
So yeah, this is more about distribution, like partnering with organizations to, get materials, educational materials out there. I think this is really about, an outreach approach, an outreach program for a specific group of users. So again, this was input received, particularly from the OEAP, that that the council, needs to spend some time focusing on materials that are and approaches that are specific to the recreational angling community. So that's where that particular potential strategy came from.
So could we still include commercial fishers in that area? Yeah.
Toby Tobias, just another question. What's the difference between anglers and fishers?
I don't think there is. It's whatever language you might prefer. Anglers is a term that, I think is probably more generally used in the mainland US. I've heard it used less in the US Caribbean, but it's whichever word you all prefer.
But the difference is all anglers are fishers, all fishers are not anglers. So that's why we wanted to include both of them. You have fishers that use traps, nets, they're not anglers, but all the anglers are fishers. But anyway, it's a matter of semantics, but as long as we all understand what we're talking about and we can review this in June, we wanted to make it more specific. So it's really up to the group, what language you would like to see there. If you're happy with anglers and fishers, or you're happy with fishers, parentheses, commercial and recreational, that's another way of putting it. But the main point is that we need to improve the public and stakeholder understanding and awareness of fishery management, current issues, and the council process. That's the key to the whole thing. And how we do it, then we need to address the different groups with the best tool that we have at hand. And I believe that what Gladfelter was saying is that maybe the topics and the tools that we use in St. Croix might be different in terms of importance and priorities from Puerto Rico or the St. Thomas and John area, excuse me.
Toby Tobias, can we just delete anglers and say recreational and commercial fishers?
Is that agreeable with the rest of the group? That's the language that we adopt.
I would agree to that. It makes it clearer because not everybody knows the difference.
So I'm fine with the group. Let's adopt the language and move on.
All right, well, Mr. Chairman, that was it. So that was all that I had. Again, we're going to be scheduling, as Miguel said, we'll be scheduling another meeting in, probably early June to more thoroughly review the draft strategies to make sure that they're worded in the way that you all would like to see them for the island specific objectives, and that they cover the range of activities that the council might pursue in its implementation plan. So, and we will be, as we mentioned to the other DAPs, we'll email this presentation out to folks so that you can see, what those potential strategies are, and be thinking about how you might want to see them modified, or any additions or edits for that June meeting.
Sounds good to me. Any other questions for Ms. Duval? Michelle?
This is Patricia again. I just want to thank you, Michelle, for a very.
Well, thank you, Patricia. I want to thank you all for, your attention and your time today, and your very thoughtful and constructive input. This strategic plan is, is about you guys, and it won't happen. It's only happening because of your input. So thank you.
Michelle, this is Marcia. I just want to add to that. You were very inclusive, and you made it very easy to understand. So thanks.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Michelle, this is David from Pew. Just wanted to say thank you. This is a lot of work normally for one group and for one organization, and you guys did it for 3 islands. And that is amazing. So I just wanted to say great work and thank you.
Thank you, David.
Edward Schuster for the record. Michelle, great work. Breaking it down like that was easy to digest and get our comments in as needed. That's my part.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, if there is nothing else, Mr. Chairman, you can close the meeting.
Motion that we close the meeting.
Okay. It's now 12:02, March 30th. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Safe Easter weekend, everybody.
Have a good day, everyone.